Well, hello, friends. It's a gift and honor to be with MaryAnn McKibben Dana this afternoon on Zoom as we talk about her recent book, Hope, a User's Manual, which we're reading here
It
at our
is.
church during Lent. Kudos, MaryAnn. It's a thoughtful, nuanced book about hope, a topic that is often treated with a lot of bromides and kind of hope tropes, as one friend said to me the other day. So we're just so grateful to be talking to MaryAnn a bit about the book, her process in writing it, what she's learned from it, and a couple of questions I've heard from some of our church members as we've delved into it. So first, thanks for doing this, MaryAnn, and thanks for putting this book out into the world.
Oh, thank you for receiving it. Thank you for engaging with it and the chance to talk to you about it, Jeff. It's been a few years since we were able to connect, and so I love the chance to connect and to talk about the things that matter and how we think about hope in a world that needs hope is one of the biggest things of all that we can be concerning ourselves with right now. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And MaryAnn previously wrote a couple other books, one on Sabbath in the Suburbs a few years back, and then more recently, God, Improv, and the Art of Living. And I think you were also here to lead a women's retreat, MaryAnn. That was maybe
I was
5 years ago.
Yeah, it was, time has no meaning anymore, but it was in the before times. And I have good memories of that. And one of the things I remember is that it snowed enough that if we were in Northern Virginia, we probably would have canceled it. But, Chicagoans are intrepid and we're like, nope, we're
we got this.
we're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
So, which is a great example of improv, right? Of improvisation. We're going to make this work. And, so anyway, it was a good weekend.
Beautiful. Well, good memories. I'd just love to jump in, MaryAnn, by reading a couple of lines from your introduction to the book, in which you talk a little bit about your prompt for writing it in the first place. You're sort of naming a few questions, and you say, how do we cultivate hope to face each day, even when our efforts don't bear fruit? How do people like Aaron, this pastor you'd referred to that you were coaching, and the community he serves find the energy to persevere, knowing their efforts may not end in triumph, but in a slow decline into an eventual closure? For that matter, how do we pursue the work of justice, knowing the task is too big for any of us? So these sort of big questions we all face. And then you write, this book is an attempt to address these questions and to write myself back into a sense of hope. I think it's a lovely way of putting it, but tease that out a little bit more for us. This book is an attempt to address those questions for yourselves, for others, and to write yourself back into a sense of.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think most writers I know are writing the book that they need to read. And in fact, on a real practical level, when you put a book proposal together, one of the things that they ask you to address is, are there other books out there about this topic? And certainly there are lots of people who have talked about hope, but and there's theological tomes. There are kind of, as you say, I love hope tropes. That phrase is so good. I'm going to shamelessly steal it because there is a lot of kind of simplistic stuff out there about hope. But it really was a personal thing for me. It came out of, this experience of pandemic. And as I say in the introduction, it's not a book about the pandemic, but that was the backdrop for my thinking about how do we find the agency to act, to move forward with purpose and with kindness and love and with a eye toward justice. And to me, that's really what hope turned out to be, is whatever gives us that agency to act in a purposeful and intentional way. And so it was really the book that I needed, and of course did a lot of reading, getting ready for it, but ultimately, just needed to wrestle with it myself. And I've been gratified that other people have wrestled along with me and engaged with it.
Yeah. The first section of the book, which I just preached about last Sunday, we're kind of going through it once a week in our church's worship calendar and adult faith formation class I'm teaching. But the first section of the book is what hope is not. And then the second section is what hope is. But I really like that because it's it's one of those very squishy words, that, as you said, has been used a lot as whether it's a hope trope or just something that's kind of milquetoast. And so clarifying what we're not talking about here is, I think you said, like, some of the titles are, hope is not optimism, hope is not future proofing, hope is not, and so on and so forth. So I so appreciate the thoughtful treatment of hope, both accessible to sort of the broad panoply of church people and non-church people, but also, really thoughtful, theologically rich insights.
Thanks. Well, it felt important to do some deconstructive work before we kind of addressed what hope is, or how hope works, or what hope does, or what do we do with hope. And there are, as you say, this kind of bromides, the kind of scripty font Instagram kind of idea of hope, which is that everything's going to work out okay. And I was very interested in thinking about how do we access hope, even if things don't work out okay. I mean, I put that in quotes, because what does that even mean? Things can work out not the way we expect, and still work out okay, but how do we live in the meantime? And one of the through lines that you'll see throughout the book is the work of a Cuban ethicist named Miguel de la Torre, who teaches at ILIF, Divinity School, if I remember correctly. But one of the early seeds of the book was hearing him speak about his book, which is called Embracing Hopelessness. And he's coming from a particular social location, racial location, that sort of thing. But his idea is sometimes we need to let go of outcome and everything kind of working out in some predetermined or positive manner. And sometimes what makes us able to act is desperation, and feeling like when hope is gone, that's what gives us the oomph, the kind of motivation. And I found that very challenging and invigorating. And also, there was a real sense in which he's speaking to and from the margins. And I'm coming from a kind of right smack dab in the middle of a lot of privilege. And so I'm hearing that in a different way, but it was really important and kind of helped seed the book in a lot of ways.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that context. I think I've just seen one citation where you talk about hope is not the opposite of desperation. That's
right. Yeah.
Good. Tell me, I'm curious, MaryAnn, how did your understanding of hope shift or deepen as you wrote about it? Did you sort of start in one place and end in another? Did you tell us about that?
Yeah. The process of putting the book together was really, and you'll notice in your congregants and those who are studying the book will see that it's just a series of very small reflections. And some of those things I had written in other contexts, or I'd been thinking about, or they may have shown up in a different form on my newsletter. And so what I realized, my early kind of stages of writing, I was doing some new writing around it, but I was kind of pulling from other things I had done and trying to make sense of how all this fit together. And so that's where the 6 sections came from. And so there were some surprises along the way. The idea that hope is an embodied phenomenon. I mean, I think that's section 3, right after what hope is not and what hope is. It's hope lives in our bodies. It's not just a mental thing we assent to. It is lived out in our imperfections, in our own, in what we do. And that, I wouldn't say it was a surprise, but it really struck me as I put that together, because I mean, you and I are good Presbyterians. We love to live in our heads.
Right.
And so the idea that coming to terms with issues around trauma, or how we repair, how we rest, I mean, hope sometimes can be like that very muscular, we just got to go and make things happen. And sometimes it's through the rest and it's through stepping back that hope can flourish. Otherwise, it's just about what we're doing, right? It's our own efforts, as opposed to what God, the Holy Spirit, whatever we want to call that, in our own Christian tradition, we think about God as working God's purposes out And sometimes we need to step back and let that happen. So my goal in what I ultimately came to, it's funny. I mean, I call it Hope a User's Manual because I want people to do something with
Yes.
the content in the book. But as you know, it's not a step-by-step thing. I think of it almost like different facets of a diamond, right? I mean, so you look at it from different angles and you see some things in it that, you know, if you think about hope as a story rather than a product, for example, or living with the practice of hope, you know, these different sections. So I guess I would say my relationship with hope really deepened, I guess, as a result of writing the book.
Beautiful. And expanded, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Right.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
One other thing that came to mind as I was reading some of the early parts of the book was, you know, in our Christian tradition, I think it's from 1 Corinthians 13, but this notion that, you know, there are three virtues, you know, faith, hope, and love. And Paul says, you know, the greatest of these is love. But as you were wrestling with hope, this, you know, doctrine or concept, do you have any thoughts on how it interacts with, say, faith and love, maybe how it's distinctive or how it's overlapping? This is maybe just a clergy dorky question, but
oh no, I love it. Yeah. No, I've thought about that some, and I haven't come to a definitive conclusion, except that I don't want to say, I mean, many religious traditions have a sense of hope. I mean, I don't want to say that at all, but there's something very particular about Christian hope. And I think it's bound up in the idea that we're kind of headed somewhere, like God is doing something with us. And there is this, even those of us who don't really talk a lot about the end times and sort of that kind of eschatology, you know, to use the big churchy word, there's still a sense that things are not as they should be. And we have a vision of how things can be. And when we're not functioning well, I have a friend, Martha Ames Sanders, who calls this malformed hope, which is, it's all going to be fine. And let's just kind of wait for God to sort it all out, right? Yeah. That's a malformed kind of hope. But I think good Christian hope is because we have been given a glimpse of the end of the story, of where that healing of creation, that new heaven and new earth, you know, that we hear about in Revelation. Because of that, we are actively involved in making that real now. So so I can't argue with Paul. I mean, the greatest of these is love. I think ultimately that's probably right. But there is something particular and I think important about the way Christians think about hope, because it is with a glimpse of the future. What does that mean for us right now? And there's some faith in that too, right? Because we don't know how it's going to all turn out, but we have this vision, this story that's been lifted up for us, and that can give us what we need to tend to the here and now, to help make that, you know, the on earth as it is in heaven, right? What we're hoping to make happen. So through the Holy Spirit, and when necessary, God will work in spite of us, right?
Yes, that's right.
Because it's not up to us. So
way beyond us.
Yeah.
One other thread throughout the book, MaryAnn, that's very courageous, both in your daughter, you know, saying okay to it, but also in your just vulnerable sharing. You talk a little bit about her journey with depression in maybe just the past couple of years. And I was really drawn to that personally because I've had my own journey with depression, at least in the last year. I've had kind of low-grade depression for many years, but got into a really tough place about a year and a half ago. Took a medical leave and experienced some amazing healing with the work of a mental health program and meds and doctors, and have a good team in place. But anyway, I was drawn to that, and just the fact that you were writing a book about hope. Your daughter, whom you love so much, you know, is really struggling, and I was just wondering about, like, how did that feel to be, you know, we're in a pandemic, Your daughter was really struggling. You're writing a book about hope. You're trying to
Yeah.
navigate your own life and stuff and family and
Mm-hmm.
work. And yeah, just how was that?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
did it inform your
Yeah.
parenting? How did it inform your faith? Yeah.
Right, right. Well, I will say one thing is the format of the book really grew out of the circumstances that I was in. And let me tell you what that means. So you are familiar with my previous book, God, Improv, and the Art of Living, which has 7 principles of improvisation as a spiritual and a life practice, right? And the chapters and the sections are kind of long, and there's an argument that's constructed there. It's I think in some ways a more sophisticated book in the organization of it, right? And this one, it's like the pandemic sort of stripped a lot of that bare. And I also sensed that where people are right now, they just need a little nugget. They need a nugget here and there. So I didn't feel as much pressure to kind of form a coherent, like, through line. It's more like devotional sort of snippets, right? That I hope are, I hope they're grounded and wise and all of those things, but it's not a treatise, you know what I mean? It's more of a devotional reflection book, right? So that's something. And I wrote it that way because I thought that it would probably be most accessible to do it that way, but also because that was the only way I could write it. Like we all were kind of at some diminished capacity in the last few years. And it's like, my brain will have smoke coming out of my ears if I try to, like, do anything more ambitious than this. But let me tell you sort of some of the chronology, because I think it's interesting. So the improv book came out in 2018. Fall of 2018 is where Caroline really cratered. And so it was most of 2019 where we were really in what Ted Lasso calls the dark forest, for those of us who are watching that show. The Empire Strikes Back of the trilogy, right? That's just really, really, and I know you know that space, right? So that was before the book. So it was but what was interesting is, I don't know if you feel this way, Jeff, when you preach, but it's like you preach the sermon and then you have to live the sermon. It's like everything you said on Sunday morning just kind of haunts you in the days afterward. If you're preaching about, vulnerability, you suddenly feel that. But anyway, I had written this book about improvisation and how we need to let go and not feel like we are in control of the plan. And then I lived that with my kid over the months to come. So by the time I wrote the Hope book, I had a lot of that in the rearview mirror. What I can share and am very upfront about is that we are dealing with some similar dynamics with our younger 2 kids, and it's very actively happening. So what I'm saying to people is, okay, that teen mental health crisis that you're reading about everywhere, like, we're ground zero right now. And it's hard, and it's also like, okay, well, we know how to do this, right? But so then the Hope book came out, and I can tell everyone, because people like to know, Caroline is a sophomore at Agnes Scott College and is just kicking butt in all kinds of ways. And so talk about hope, right? And we don't take that for granted, but we just enjoy the hard work that this kid has done and the fruit of that, right? So anyway, improv book comes out. I got to improvise all over the place. Hope book comes out. I'm dealing with the same kind of stuff that I already, right? So it's like, it's living the book, right? And so I was thinking the other day, I was like, I need to stop writing books. It's like, I write them, I put it out there, and then it's like, oh, I have to live all of these things that I put out there, right? But I wouldn't have it any other way, because the other side of that is people coming to me and saying, yeah, me too. Like, I feel this as well. And I feel just 3% less alone because I was able to read this. And boy, that makes a huge difference, right? So yeah, I'm holding hope more lightly, I guess, in some ways, but also relying on it more. I mean, it's just an interesting kind of place to be. I'm really glad that I did all that work on it, because I'm resting on those ideas all the time. So so that maybe gives you a little sense of the chronology and how it's all playing out in our house. But yeah,
I love that.
it's a lot.
Preaching the sermon or writing the book, but then living the sermon, living the book. That's so much of where the rubber meets the road. For all of
Yes,
us.
absolutely.
From,
That's right.
from theory
That's right.
and then to practice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you,
Certainly
MaryAnn, so much for this time. Maybe a good place to end would just be to thank you again for putting this out in the world, and to ask you to tell us, how can people connect with you or read more from you if they're watching this video and wondering, oh yeah, I want to get that book, or oh, how can I subscribe to MaryAnn's newsletter or website? So tell us how we can stay in touch with you.
Right. I'm putting all kinds of stuff out in the world these days. In addition to, I've got a part-time call as an associate pastor here in Herndon, Virginia, where I'm located. But people can access my website, MaryAnnMcKibbenDana.net. But the main place where I'm doing a lot of writing right now, and you can get there from the website, and I'll give you the link so you can maybe put it in the YouTube link or whatever. But I write a newsletter every Friday. It is kind of what's inspiring me, what's challenging me. I write a lot about hope. I'm starting to write more about mental health and some of my learnings as a parent, and someone who's supporting people, little people, young people through that journey. And so I invite people to subscribe, and you'll get just a little burst of hope, or hopefully a little insight every Friday in your inbox. And there's also a podcast, and I announce episodes in the Friday morning newsletter for that as well. So lots of places to find me, and I look forward to connecting. And the messages that people send are just a real lifeline. As you know, as a writer of sermons, knowing that someone has heard you, even if they see it differently, or hear something different than what you intended. It's just such a gift to hear from people. So I hope people will keep in touch.
Yes. Well, thank you for letting us know how we can stay in touch. Both Ariane and I subscribe to MaryAnn's newsletter and enjoy reading those very much. MaryAnn, may you continue to embody hope in your life, in your ministry, and we're just really grateful for the chance to connect, and thanks for hopping on Zoom to do this recording.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's been
great to you, and
thank you. Well, you too.
Take good care.
Thanks.